We're pleased to welcome back Congressman Joe Sestak of Pennsylvania, a member of the House Armed Services Committee. You should know that the Armed Services Committee is having a hearing on the European Missile Defense Plan in a short time this morning, beginning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Many of you are regular watchers of our program. For those of you for whom he is a new guest, I should tell you a couple things about his bio as we begin here. He spent 31 years in the U.S. Navy and was retired as a 3-star admiral during the Clinton administration, was a foreign policy advisor in the White House, PhD in political economy and government from Harvard University. He's also a candidate for the U.S. Senate from Pennsylvania. Well, there's much in the newspaper this morning about Afghanistan, including some reporting out of the 3-hour strategy session that happened in the White House yesterday with President Obama and top advisors trying to figure out his next move in Afghanistan. From the reading, there are basically two camps that's being reported. The ones who support General McChrystal's proposal for increased troop levels and a counterinsurgency plan, and the so-called, I'll call it the Biden camp, which is looking more towards focusing with drones and intelligence on al-Qaeda and Taliban connections. Which camp are you in at this point?
I lean more towards the former. I was on the ground very early in that war when I headed the Navy's anti-terrorism unit. Short mission. I came back 18 months later and saw how it had spiraled downward so drastically because we had gone into that tragic misadventure of Iraq. I therefore am supportive of the original reason we went in, which was to eradicate al-Qaeda. But there's no more al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. They are present in what General Hayden 2 years ago, head of the CIA, said is a safe haven from whence they can plan another 9/11 against us quietly, if they're not disturbed, over in Pakistan. So I will accept what the general wants to do if the goal is eradicate that safe haven in Pakistan by supporting Pakistan in doing it from a base, and that base is Afghanistan. And second, that there is a very well-defined exit strategy, not with a date that's certain for withdrawal, but with benchmarks for success and failure of how is this treasure we're pouring into that conflict giving us results that we can see, to leave behind the probability, not the certainty, but the probability that al-Qaeda will not move once they're eradicated in Pakistan back to Afghanistan as we redeploy. My position is put myself 5 years from now, and if we left al-Qaeda in a safe haven to plan against us, what would we say if they did strike us again in 9/11? And so with a proper exit strategy, and not trying to do nation building like we once did at the beginning of this conflict, but leaving behind certain conditions that there is stability as we redeploy, I can support a slight troop increase.
Let's go to phone calls as quickly as you can here. For Republicans, 202-737-0001. For Democrats, 202-737-0002. And our line for Independents, 202-628-0205. Again, in the reading of the papers this morning, there's emphasis from the Senate, Senator Carl Levin, saying that we basically need a much larger Afghan army much quicker. That's the bottom line. That's the winning strategy.
It might be the winning strategy a few years from now, but the Afghanistan army will take years to bring up to the level they would ever have an opportunity to deal with the damage that's already been done. Only U.S. troops can provide immediately the template of security where we begin to win the trust of the population towards us. To turn it over and rely upon the Afghanistan military to do it now, we will never get there. We've got to bring it up as we train them and let them take it over as we redeploy. But I have to say again, what we didn't have in Iraq, and this administration has not provided yet, is a requirement for an exit strategy, so we know what are the results of what we're doing. If the administration can't provide that, how do they know if their strategy is going to be successful? And that's the caveat I have that they must provide.
There are a host of stories, if you're interested in reading more, because of the 3-hour meeting at the White House yesterday. Many major newspapers have done some reporting. One of the more interesting this morning is Yochi Dreesen's in the Wall Street Journal. Gates doubts U.S.-Afghan strategy. As Obama reviews options, Defense Secretary worries manpower-intensive plan won't stop the Taliban.
Here's what I keep in mind. When I had to go into Afghanistan fairly early in that war for that short mission, I met with then head of the NSA, National Security Agency, the eavesdropping with the satellites, Mike Hayden, General Hayden. And what he said to me before I went in is, hey, Joe, you know, General Franks, who was running the Army there, keeps telling me, give me some actionable intelligence we can act on. General Hayden said, I keep telling General Franks, give me some action, and I'll give you some intelligence. In short, if you don't have some boots on the ground that makes them move a little bit, makes them do something untoward where we can, with our technology or unmanned air vehicles, pick it up, then you're not going to be capable of finding the Al-Qaeda where they are and eradicating them. So some troop movements are necessary, but not the heft like we had in Iraq.
Continues to be a number of articles trying to understand the impact of the Afghan vote and what kind of stability we would find from the leadership there. Can you add your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think you'll find minimum leadership coming from the capital. This is one where at one time we told the Taliban, remove Al-Qaeda and we won't invade Afghanistan. Well, now we can accept that some of the Taliban may remain, and warlords and local provincial leaders are probably the ones that provide the stability. This is not like when the Russians went into Afghanistan. When they went in, they murdered, often drunk, 1 million Afghanis, dislocated 4 million from their homes, and it gave rise to an insurrection of 250,000. At most, there's probably 20,000 Taliban, and most of them, 70%, are there really for a wage, a job. 30%, about 6,000, are the ones that are very radical. We can deal with this as long as we know with measurements how well we're progressing. Otherwise, we fall back to Plan B, which is by and large a containment strategy, which may not work as well.
Carol Troll asked by Twitter, Representative Sestak, do you agree with your colleagues, Representative Hastings, that Congress is not educated on the language and factions in Afghanistan in order to make an assessment?
Congress people have a tough job, but yes, I think that people who are truly having their most important duty being one of helping to support troops overseas, declaring war, that's what we do in Congress, should be a bit more imbued in some of the terminology. During the debate on Iraq or redeployment, I guess I was surprised at times where certain individuals would say, well, we can be out of Iraq in 4 months. As you can see in the redeployment plan, one of the most difficult things for military to do is to redeploy. And it can take now, as you well know, about a year and a half. So to have better sense of what the military can do, I think would obviously serve our nation well.
Let's get to calls, beginning with one from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is Mike, Republican line. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can our goals be achieved without eradication of the Taliban? Number two, can we defeat the Taliban without counterinsurgency and creation of a stable Afghanistani army and police structure? And three, does this not require a very long-term and comprehensive approach to the problem? I'll hang up and listen. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. It can be accomplished without eradication of the Taliban, but it can't be accomplished without the goal, if the goal is to eradicate Al-Qaeda, which is a totally separate entity, although some of the Taliban have been Al-Qaeda-ized, but that's the true goal. The issue with the Taliban is to try to ensure that those that would give haven in Afghanistan, if Al-Qaeda came back, are isolated and removed. That's probably about, roughly, some estimates say 6,000. The other Taliban, we unfortunately, but we can live with, because the treasure to put into Afghanistan to get it back up to a level where we once wanted nation building is just too much for the benefit that costs. So that truly is what we have to. And we do need to have the Afghanistan army and military to have some semblance of being able to provide stability throughout that country. But it's going to rely upon, I believe, warlords, tribal chiefs, and others who give local control and support. And that's what I believe is the right strategy.
Next question is Exeter, New Hampshire. Dan, Democrats line.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Representative. 2 points. How damaging was the first 8 years of this conflict being under-resourced and slow-walked, and that we find ourselves in this position? And second, if you're trying to deny Al-Qaeda a training camp, You could take a football field size and put 15 guys in a broken airplane there, and you can have your training facility. How impossible is it to patrol every square mile of Afghanistan so a handful of terrorists won't get together and train? And,
absolutely. To your first question, one of the more daunting statements I think made was 2 years ago where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, in Iraq we do what we must. In Afghanistan we do what we can. This nation, after it took its focus off Afghanistan, and I was commanding an aircraft carrier battle group after I came out of Afghanistan, we're doing retaliatory strikes, and we were doing that war in the right way. We diverted our attention and our resources to Iraq. There we did what we must, as the chairman said. We took psychological operations forces, civil affairs forces, special operations forces, those that know how to fight, but also help to have a society develop. And because of that movement of resources and attention, that's why the chairman also said 2 years ago, Afghanistan is spiraling downward. We're having to pull it up by its bootstraps to a certain level in order to redeploy, to your second question, so that we can redeploy. Training camps. Look, I understand when I speak about safe havens that there could be safe havens in Yemen, Somalia, or other places, but this is different. This terrain out there is unique in the world. Second, the demographics. Those who accept them, the tribal leaders and others, particularly in Pakistan, is different. There's an acceptance of radicalism there. And third, it's the leaders of Al-Qaeda that are there. And those leaders have to communicate, knowing that they're there, and being able to remove them before they disperse somewhere else and come together somewhere else, where I doubt they will, because that's a very good place to hide. That's the reason I see this place as unique. It doesn't take a lot, but it takes the right types of forces. And as was mentioned by Susan here, we do need sophisticated UAVs and all. But boots on the ground make some difference, particularly since we want the Pakistanis to be doing it on their side of the border, and we have to be closing the door on this other side.
Fort Wayne, Indiana. Ned, Republican line.
Hey, Mr. Sestak, how you doing?
Good, fine, thank you.
I just want to say that throughout the summer, throughout all the town halls and everything, I caught yours in the C-SPAN, and I just want to say that I think you're a good guy, and there's not many like you up there, and just to keep fighting for us and do the right thing. On the Afghanistan issue, how much of this is going to war, not going to war, what game plan? How much is being used as a political platform, and if it is a lot, what can you do? What is in your power to make sure that that doesn't become the issue, that the American people and that our troops become the main priority?
It's a great question. My issue is that everyone must recognize that the President's and Congress's most sacred duty is providing for security of this nation. Now, security is often provided by health security and other means, but in this case, the most prominent one is defense security. This decision on Afghanistan should not be delayed too long, because it's very hard over there for our troops. And if we are going to have a change in strategy, we need to do it soon and not let it get caught up in other political calculations of the healthcare debate and other issues. I believe this president will do the right thing, whatever he decides. But if there's something where politics should not be interpreted as affecting it, that's open debate. My being here today is part of just trying to lay out from my experience how I see this conflict developing. I may be right or wrong, but I think getting more politicians out there to debate the details, as Susan said earlier, they're making important decisions on this, are influencing it. Do they truly understand what's going on the ground and taking the time to do it? And that's our duty to do that, much like we did the health care debates and understanding and having read the bill to discuss it.
David Ignatius, the longtime national security columnist for the Washington Post, is on the ground in Waziristan. Explain to people where Waziristan is, please.
Waziristan it's a tribal area that is about a little bit of the southwest. And the reason we are very concerned about these areas and why he is there is we have often seen that these become ungoverned regions. By ungoverned, I mean that there is no central control over them. Now, that is true both in Pakistan and in Afghanistan. And the problem is the two central governments tend to want to focus on each other rather than asserting control out there in the tribal lands to where they let warlords and others have power. That has led to mischief. Mischief being Al-Qaeda and other radical Islamic elements being able to be hidden there. The reason he's there, I gather, is he's trying to make an assessment of how well can this new counterinsurgency effort, both on the parts of Pakistani government and our efforts on the other side of the border, help to win over the warlords, the others, so that they don't hide these radicalized elements.
Here's a little bit of Mr. Ignatius reporting. The Massoud warriors have defied the British Raj, the Pakistani army, and lately the Americans and their high-tech Predator drones. Since 2001, they have offered a haven to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and in the process made Waziristan one of the most dangerous spots on earth. A new battle for control of Waziristan is coming as the Pakistani military prepares a ground offensive in the Massoud area against Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters. The army has codenamed the operation Rahe-Najat, which the commander here loosely translates as the way to get rid of them. The assault could start within the next month.
And the challenge for us is this. Up until recently, Pakistan's army has been focused almost exclusively upon India. Now that their forces are turning toward counterinsurgency efforts, they're not well trained. As of recently, we might have just had 30 or 40 troops over there trying to train them how not to destroy the village with their F-16s or their tanks, but rather to save the village by eradicating those elements in a counterinsurgency door-to-door effort. That's the challenge we have. How do we change their strategy to be effective and not lose the hearts and minds of the populace?
I'm going to read this part too, and then we'll go back to calls, because it's the question of what happens if they're successful militarily, what comes next.
Yes.
And you might apply this to all of Afghanistan as you think about this. The Pakistani strategy for rebuilding control here might be termed back to the future. Once the Taliban's hold is broken, the army will work with the Maliks to restore the old tribal system. The Maliks will get stipends for their durgas or governing council, and for a network of sentries known as Khazsadars. The Maliks will also revive local militias that can defend against insurgents.
Exactly. That is the strategy. We are not trying to have an Iraq-like strategy where there's a central government that has somehow co-opted control somewhat throughout the country, and then it has the Sons of the Awakening and all. This is really to begin to have the local power structures on our side. Part of it is going to be efforts of small economic development. Take literacy. 2% of the women in Afghanistan are literate. That means they can sign their name. Small efforts. Now, they may not accept women being literate as these Taliban if we leave them behind, but small efforts in economic development, etc., that they might have, small stipends, is the way to go to wean them away from poppies and other ways of getting their income.
Next question, Providence, Rhode Island. Evan, Independent Line.
Good morning. Thank you, C-SPAN and Representative Sestak. I'm curious, can you name one Al-Qaeda member who is not also a member of the CIA?
Wow. I can't think of any Al-Qaeda member who's a member of the CIA.
Evan, are you still...
How about bin Laden? He worked for the CIA until 2001.
I would imagine, although I don't know exactly what you're talking about, that as the years and decades go on, there are efforts to purchase information off. For example, when I flew into Afghanistan for a short mission at the beginning of the war, I went in, sitting beside me was a fellow with the CIA who had a suitcase filled with millions of dollars with a handcuff to the suitcase because they were going to buy loyalty in there. I imagine that sometimes somebody who was in Al-Qaeda, we might have purchased information, but that does not mean at all with a wonderful intelligence service that there's ever meant to be a co-option of them in which side they reside upon with their loyalties.
Churchville, Virginia. This is Teresa, Democrats Line. Good morning, Teresa.
Good morning. How are you?
Fine. Your question.
Good morning.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your service that you served, because now I appreciate it more that I'm married to military. My concerns are, now that I am married to a Marine, it's my concern of whether we are definitely deploying or not. My husband got news yesterday and informed me that they might be deploying in this October, and I was wondering exactly, what was going on over there, and, if there is a definite of deployment, and as well as, is it just, going over there for security purposes or actually fighting for the war, and as well as everybody else over there, is there some coming back and more being deployed, or just more being deployed as well as others being over there?
First, thank you for your service. When I was in the Navy, people used to say, hardest job, Navy spouse, hardest job in the Navy. So thanks for what you do. Second, after 9/11, our whole security changed. Before, we used to say, we want our wars over there. We like away games. After 9/11, we had, unfortunately, a home game where terrorism from over there could affect us here at home with catastrophic results, as we saw at 9/11. I was stationed at the Pentagon when 9/11 happened. And so going over there, as your husband may, yes, we are going to continue deployments because men and women go over there for a certain length of time. We need to rotate them. And there may be a slight increase of 20,000 troops in all. They are doing what they signed up to do, and thank goodness there are those who say, here am I, send me, to go over and defend America. The decision being made by our Commander-in-Chief this week is, do we have the right strategy? Is it more troops, a change to a counterinsurgency, or is it more intelligence gathering apparatus, technical gear that can help us stop the Al-Qaeda from planning against us? And that's the decision being made this week. My belief is that it is a combination of both. But what this president must provide us is these are the benchmarks that I can demonstrate to you if the strategy is working. We have not had that up to now, and that is what must be provided, along with any request for change in strategy or troops.
This viewer asked by Twitter, his name is Joe, how can you promote economic development, that's in quotes, if you crush the only method of making a living in Afghanistan? And he puts in parentheses, growing plants we don't like.
It's interesting. Can it be done? Yes. First of all, we've had the wrong counter drug strategy. We brought over our ambassador from Colombia and placed him in there, and we began to eradicate all the poppies as they were being grown. We tend to forget the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are sort of like the mafia. They'll give you a loan to put the seeds in, and then when your plants are destroyed by the United States flying around eradicating them, they turn and say, I'm sorry, they said, they don't care, now come and join my army since you don't have the money to repay me. These farmers just want a living. There are other means to do so. They can be by a program that we approved $375 million for of microloans, that they then are often only $10,000 equivalent, that they can start their own gardens and all. These people, the difference between here and places in Iraq, want stability. Did not like Taliban. They've lost confidence because of the corruption of Kabul and the leadership there. What we now need to do is win enough of their trust, along with the warlords, to show that there can be some economic development, not equivalent to us, that they don't have to provide opium to the Al-Qaeda. It's a tough strategy, I grant you that, but I think it's absolutely necessary.
Last question for Mr. Sestak is from Grosse Pointe, Michigan. This is John, Republican line.
Good morning. Can I call you Joe?
Please.
Oh, good. Yeah, we're about the same age. I served during Vietnam.
You're 25 too, huh?
Yeah. A couple of things, just some thoughts. I don't mean to sound silly, but do you ever see Kelly's Heroes, the movie Kelly's Heroes?
I don't think
that was just sort of an overall view of things. Well, all wars are economic, my father said, ex-Marine and a surgeon and a very wise individual and a historian. A couple of things that cross my mind are, and these are varied and don't all connect necessarily, But the securing of the ammo dumps for 1 year, we did not do that in Iraq, and it sounds very convenient to me. It's always seemed that way. Another thing is that since 9/11, not only has the economy become globalized, but terrorism has become globalized. And the other thing is, I don't think we can we'll never win in Afghanistan. I think we have to negotiate this. And stabilization in Pakistan seems to be the central point of all this. Thanks so much.
I think you've hit upon something. How do you define a win? To me, the win is Al-Qaeda doesn't have a safe haven. Doesn't mean we're not going to face them elsewhere to plan against us with their leadership. However, you've hit upon a second important point, economics. Admiral Blair, our head intelligence officer, so to speak, in the administration, said about a year ago that the gravest danger to America's security is the economic challenges around the world. Let's take, for example, Tajikistan. Hundreds of thousands of young Tajiks, young Muslim men, worked in the oil fields of Russia for the past decade. And it was booming. Russia's laid them all off because of this great globalized recession. They've come home, no money. They can't get married because they don't have money. And so they are attracted to a Tajik warlord who might be associated with the Taliban, who gives them a living wage. Of the 20,000 Taliban that are there, approximately 70% are there for a wage, is assessed, not because they are truly fervent believers in the ideology. So some negotiation on some means, minimum as it is, almost de minimis, of some economic livelihood is probably what we have to work out. This is a different type of conflict than it would have been if we had stayed on course in 2001, 2, and 3 and completed the job of finishing Al-Qaeda, leaving behind some society that basically had a large step forward. We got to give it some step forward, so there's the little probability, but some probability Al-Qaeda might come back. That's about the best we can do, given what happened the last 8 years of taking our attention off this mission.
As the nation waits for the president to announce his decision on Afghanistan, we say thank you to Congressman Joe Sestak for being here on this Thursday morning.
Thank you, Susan, very much.
We're going to continue the discussion. One more guest on this topic, Congressman Mac Thornberry of Texas, who is a member of Armed Services as well, but he also is a member of the Intelligence Committee, and he'll bring both of those perspectives to our discussion with you.